Shanley, Marilyn Welland, Laura Seba and I first discussed the idea of Richard and I designing a new garden at the American Rose Center, needless to say, I was intrigued and excited by the idea. When Jackson and Perkins agreed to donate our services, that idea became a reality. But as an almost 25-year member of the American Rose Society, I felt this garden needed to be something special, something different from other public rose gardens. From this idea came to tell the history of the rose in America. It's one the American Rose Society is uniquely poised to tell, because in many ways they are the history of the rose in America. This developed into the concept that you would enter the garden in the modern era of rose growing, and then walk back through time to learn the history of the rose in America. But what should a design that tells the story over time look like? As Richard and I pondered this, one morning I found an email from Richard in my inbox with this drawing. Richard's note said, "I've got it! This is the design!" Now I thought perhaps he had a few too many light ales, but when we got on a Skype call later, he told me this drawing is actually the inner workings of a wristwatch. In fact, a Rolex watch. It lends itself nicely to a garden design and also one that tells time. It fit beautifully into the space at the American Rose Center that had been cleared for the garden, a space covering some 3+ acres. From this concept emerged the design. Visitors, of course, will start at the Klima Center. They will pass through the newly built Shanley Del Vecchio Pavilion. They will start in the garden in the McFarland Plaza at the era of modern roses. From there, they move through the second garden, the third garden, and into the fourth garden, all while walking backward through the history of the rose in America. Emerging into the fourth garden, they will find species roses and spring-flowering old garden roses displayed in a more natural setting. But it doesn't end there. The current Wind Sound Garden will tell the future of the rose in America, because it will be hosting the newly created American Rose Center International Rose Trials. This is a three-dimensional view, giving you a better oversight of what the garden will look like. The Klima Center is in the upper left-hand corner. The walls of the circular beds themselves are going to be 3 feet high, but they will be planted with azaleas to soften the wall, but also because the azaleas will bloom before the roses bloom. Therefore, visitors will have even more of a reason to come into this garden before the roses flower. Another three-dimensional view from the top of the garden, the Klima Center would be to your right, and one more three-dimensional view from the bottom of the garden. This is the garden laid out over an actual survey of the existing site. You can see the existing gardens, many of which will be removed, to make room for the new garden. The dimensions are grand as well. The McFarland Plaza is 82 feet wide. Circle 2 is 114 feet wide. Circle 3, 131 feet wide. And Circle 4 tops it all out at 154 feet wide. The beds themselves are 9 feet wide, allowing for a mass planting of roses to give us that wow factor that we want visitors to experience. The paths are 13 feet wide, and that's to give pedestrians lots of room to move. We also want to make sure the garden features education besides just the history of the rose in America. We can educate visitors about the wide variety of rose classes and their use in any garden setting from formal to informal, including climbing roses. Educate visitors about planting for beneficial insects. Educate visitors about game-changing moments in our rose history in America. For example, the peace rose was a game-changing moment. Tell its story, which is fascinating. Then plant its numerous sports around it to educate what a rose sport actually is. And the history of the rose in America and the history of America itself are really intertwined. For example, many of the found roses out west made their way with the migrations of the 1800s. George Washington was one of our first early American rose hybridizers. Noisette roses were found in this country in Charleston, South Carolina. So the history of the rose in America and the history of America itself thread themselves nicely together, and this garden can tell them both. When designing a garden of this size, you always want to design it with maintenance in mind, and we have done so. Foliar applications will certainly be used in this garden, but rather than having people walk around doing it by hand, the paths are big enough and laid out in a way that they can be done with a tractor, a PTO sprayer, and a spray gun, never having to get off the tractor. The paths right now are made out of grass. That keeps the cost down. But edge the beds with brick or stone to make string trimming quicker and keep mulch in the beds. A zero-turn mower with a 4-foot deck can mow those paths incredibly quickly. And for complete access on all sides to the beds, the ones that are against the wall have a 4-foot service path only for staff so they can access the back of those beds. In looking at a possible 5-year plan, here's a way it could be implemented. Year 1, the new gate, plant the existing island beds that will be left behind, and the McFarland Plaza. Year 2, plant Circle 2. Year 3, plant circle 3, and keeping with the theme, circle 4 is planted in year 4. In the future, existing island beds can be built around the watch part to continue to tell the story. Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and hope and work, remembering that a noble, logical design, once recorded, will never die, but long after we are gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. This grand garden has a grand design and grand ambitions, and it's a story that only really the American Rose Society can tell. On behalf of Richard, myself, and Jackson and Perkins, we would like to thank the American Rose Society for including us in part of this grand garden project. It is truly a unique and wonderful story that only the American Rose Society can tell.